Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here, it really is, and there's a lot of you. But I would venture to say that the average Democrat in San Diego is not like you. And the reason I say that is because if the average Democrat were like you, then we would need to rent out a stadium to house everybody for this event tonight. So you were the ones that came and showed up. And for each one of us, there's a moment, sort of a pivot point, that spurs us into action. Before that moment, we were blissfully ignorant of what was going on in any particular issue, and then something happened that pushed us over the edge and made us commit to something bigger. There was some moment for you, and I'm sure if you think about it for a minute, you can remember the day or the hour or even the minute when you decided that you were going to be a more active Democrat. And beyond being Democrat or Republican or Independent, you were going to be more active in our democracy, our democratic process. And I applaud you. There was a moment for me before which gun control was not on my mind and it was not in my vocabulary. After that instant, it was all I could think about. That instant was Sandy Hook. Perhaps that was a moment for some of you in this room too. It was the moment that pushed me over the edge from apathy to, I gotta do something. So I had just gotten off work, I was getting in my car, I was turning on, any NPR listeners in the room? I had a hunch. And they were repeating the news of what had happened that morning. I couldn't believe that I had worked an entire day and not heard about this. And I went home sick to my stomach. I called my brand new girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. She happened to, it was a long distance relationship. She lived in Moscow, Russia. Wow. And I told her I was really depressed, and she said, why, what's wrong? And I said, well, we just had this horrific, tragic loss of life. And not just a loss of life, but a loss of children, 6 and 5, and a principal and teachers. And she could not fathom what I was feeling. And this was the worst that I had felt since 9/11. I remember the day 9/11. Do you remember that day? I was walking around in a stupor that entire day. Now, San Diego is a long ways from New York, but it didn't matter. And all I could think about that day was not just the victims, but their families, the ones that have to go on. And so here we were again, because someone had walked into a school with a weapon capable of spraying bullets, a weapon that's not a recreational tool, but a killing machine designed specifically for that purpose. And I decided I have to do something. So that was my moment. It wasn't just my moment, it was a moment for several of us, some of whom have joined me today from Brady Campaign. And so a few weeks later, we met at a coffee shop in Tierra Santa. There was one woman who had been running the local Brady Campaign by herself for several years, a lone wolf in the wilderness. And now she had some help. So we got involved, and ever since then we've been working hard, much like you all have, to spread the word. Unfortunately, just like Donald Trump is using PR to further his campaign without having to spend a lot of money, a lot of our work is being done for us because we keep having shootings. Sadly, the more shootings we have, the more this becomes a hot topic. And in fact, this is the first time that I can remember that gun control was a presidential campaign issue. So that's a big deal. But here we are, and it's not just the mass shootings, which are defined, interestingly enough, as 4 or more deaths in a shooting. We have plenty of those. But while we've been talking, a few people in this country have already been shot dead. An average of 90 people die a day from gunshot wounds. There's just a few more than 90 people in this room right now. Okay, so just take this room and erase it. Okay, and then multiply that by all the family members who no longer have their loved ones. So that's every day. And that doesn't count all the injuries, so there's over 100,000 people injured by guns every year. How many people are parents in this room? I hope to be one soon, but 9 kids a day die, usually because of an accidental shooting. They found a gun in the home, they played with it, and someone got shot. Guns are dangerous, dangerous, dangerous things. Even the ones that only shoot a few bullets. Only the ones that shoot 1 bullet at a time. They're dangerous. Let's look at some other dangerous things that we regulate, like drugs. The FDA has a rigorous process for allowing drugs to be sold to us so we can put them in our mouths and not have adverse side effects. Cars. Cars kill 30,000 people a year, now. Guns kill over 30,000 people a year, now. Cars used to kill a lot more people as a percentage of the total population. But over the decades, we have passed a whole bunch of laws that help keep us safe. And even though we have a heck of a lot more cars on the road, it's a lot safer to drive a car today than it ever has been. So bumper regulations and crumple zones and airbags and rear view safety cameras and child safety belts and child seats, and the list goes on. But then what else? What else? Can anyone just buy a car and go drive it? What do you got to do? You got to buy car insurance. You got to register it. You got to do what else?
Test.
You got to pass a test. Okay? And not just once. You got to pass it again a few years later, right? Now what happens if you are a reckless driver? What happens if you drive under the influence and get caught? Never mind if you do something else while under the influence. What happens then? Your license gets taken away. All right. Is there anybody that questions this? Is there anybody that says, we have a God-given right to our cars? Is there anybody who says, you are violating my constitutional rights when you take my car away? No. Is there anybody who says, when we pass another law that protects us in our cars, that they're trying to take all our cars away? Yeah. No. Okay? But yet, with guns, that's exactly what the gun rights activists are saying. Now, the crutch that they usually lean on is, well, there's a few. One is what?
Second Amendment. The
Second Amendment. Okay. Our constitutional, God-given right, because it's in the Bible somewhere. They didn't have a gun yet, but God knew they were coming. Okay? The Second Amendment, why did the Second Amendment come into being? Slave repression. That might have been one of the reasons.
Rebellion.
But let's,
at the time, the militia needed guns so that they could protect against the British, but also, that was one of the reasons that they wanted them to have guns, that private citizens would have access to a gun to protect themselves against the British.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat that. And you're spot on, and I'm going to expand on your answer. So he's saying that we needed militias to be able to protect us from the British, and people needed to be able to have access to guns to protect themselves. So I'm going to expand on that and give you a little bit of history, very quick history. England had experienced hundreds of years of this cycle where for a time you'd have a militia that was armed, and then the new king would take over and say, nah, I don't want anyone to be armed, I'm going to be a dictator. So round up everybody, take away their guns, and I'm going to make my own new standing army, and we're going to oppress everybody and tax the heck out of them. So this would happen until enough people got upset, and then that king would be killed or taken out of power, and then things would reverse, and then they'd reverse again. So fast forward to the 1700s and the founding of the United States, and it was the same kind of thing. You had King George, you had a standing army, you had heavy taxes, and the U.S. said enough. They weren't the U.S. yet, but they were about to be. So after we got our independence, the Founding Fathers debated a lot about the Constitution, and they debated so much that they had to create a Bill of Rights, a set of amendments to guarantee further freedoms. One of the things they were really worried about was that in the United States, the federal government could become tyrannical, could become overcome with dictators, and they wanted to give the states the ability to arm themselves and have militias in case something like this would occur. And also there was a dual purpose. Congress wanted to have the ability to call up reservists in case the country was being attacked and they needed more people than was in the standing army. So they needed people to have the right to keep and bear arms. Now, if you read a lot of the court decisions from the 1800s, they're very specific about what the word bear means in this context, which means you're going to war. It's a military context. Bear doesn't mean concealed carry in a restaurant. But that's how it's interpreted. It doesn't mean to possess and own necessarily, it means to keep and bear. They also wanted citizens to be able to have access to tents and equipment, everything they would need to become a militia in the spur of the moment if need be. Okay. Also back then when they founded this amendment, and it is an amendment, which means it can be changed. In fact, the Constitution can be changed, believe it or not. Back then we didn't have AK-47s and AR-15s and guns with bullet button magazines, and we had muskets. Okay, so what happens when you have a musket? Well, you gotta put some gunpowder in, you gotta tamp it down, you gotta aim. They weren't very accurate back then, and they didn't have quite a range either. So you shot. That is if you were still angry. Maybe you calm down by then. This isn't my joke. You gotta watch Jim Jeffries' special. Jim Jeffries, some people have seen it. It's absolutely hysterical, and if I had brought that and just played the YouTube video, you wouldn't need me tonight. But at any rate, so that's the Second Amendment. Okay. Back in 1991, Warren Burger, Chief Justice Warren Burger at the time, said that the hijacking of the Second Amendment to make the case against gun control was the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the country. For the reasons that I'm talking about. But the NRA has made it its plank, and now everyone that is firmly in the gun rights camp is using that as their rallying cry. You cannot take away our Second Amendment rights. You are trying to take away our Second Amendment rights. Is there anyone in this room who's interested in taking away anyone's constitutional rights? No. I'll take it by the silence and the one no that we're unanimous in the no. Okay? That gentleman was raising his hand. You do want to take away someone's rights, or?
It would help the rest of us. Then we have to take away their rights. Like someone who's going to blow up something, someone who's going to take a car and run it down the street, so we can take their rights.
We're going to have a Q&A.
We're going to have a Q&A later.
Okay, well, I'm being told to take questions later, so I apologize. I'll keep it moving.
You've got 10 minutes.
Okay, I've got 10 minutes. That'll work. That'll work. And if I get cut off, this topic is so lengthy and so meaty that I could take the next 10 hours. But, all right, I want to talk about something else. So imagine, I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it. This is going to be a brutal example. We all came here tonight, and we're happy to be here, and we saw all friends, and we all got some coffee and some food. We sat down, we're having a good time here, and suddenly we hear loud noises. And people are falling down, and there's a lot of screaming. And we realize that there's a gun attack going on. Now we're all diving under tables, we're scampering for the exits, and we're hoping that the police get here soon, and some of us don't make it. But what if at least one of us was carrying a gun? What if there was a good guy in the room who had a gun?
It would be whoops.
Because the only way to stop, I think we know this, let's say it together. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? Okay. So what does that mean? It means that me and all of you now have to go out and buy a gun. Okay? You have to go out and buy a gun. You have to go and get training. You have to know how to fire that thing. You got to know how to pull it out in a hurry in case something's going down. You got to know how to stay calm while mayhem is going on, and I use that word deliberately. You got to keep steely calm and try not to, oh, I'm sorry, I hit you by accident. Okay, where's that guy? I know he's here. Oh, I hit you too, I'm sorry, ma'am. Wait, all right, hold still for a second, guy. All right, oh, hello, officer. No, I'm not the bad guy. He's over there. No, don't run. I'm dropping my gun now. Okay, good guy with a gun doesn't work. And if you ask people who, for a living, train people in law enforcement, if you talk to people who've been in the military, who have been in firefights, now I haven't, so you could say, Ron, you don't know because you haven't been in a firefight, but I've been doing a lot of reading, I've seen interviews. You do not know what it's like to have bullets flying at you. You just don't. And even the best trained can make mistakes in a deadly situation. And we've heard too many instances lately about police officers who have been gunned down, and they're the ultimate good guys with guns. Now, never mind being ambushed in a crowd. A couple of years ago, there were a couple of policemen sitting in a restaurant when a man and his wife came in, shot them both calmly while they were sitting in their booth eating, laid them on the floor and draped a Nazi flag over them, then walked over to the next door Walmart, were accosted by a worker at Walmart who grabbed one of the guns at Walmart, because Walmart's a great place to buy guns, by the way, and he was shot dead. Okay, so that's 3 good guys with a gun, at least 2 of them very well trained. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, what about the mental health issue? Because it's the mentally ill that are doing this. It's not guns. Guns don't kill people. People do. So let's round up all the mentally ill folks and take care of that, and we won't have any more problems.
Right.
All right. So who's to say which one of us is mentally stable and who isn't? I'm going to quote another line from Tim Jeffries. You don't know that you're crazy. That's why you're crazy. Okay? And even if you're not crazy, now we're all human beings, and at some point or other in our life, we've been pushed to some level of despair, anger, challenge, whatever it is, that we snapped a little bit. Some people snap more than others. Okay? I like to believe all of us in this room are very calm and moderate people. And most people are. But it doesn't take much for someone to, in the spur of the moment, do something that they wish they hadn't done. And with a gun, it happens very fast, very deadly, and you can't take it back. We have 20,000 suicides by gun in this country. 20,000 suicides. They can't take it back. If they had a knife instead, they might have had a harder time killing themselves in the moment. So, I could go on and on and on, but I know I have less than 10 minutes now. So, let's talk about what we can do, because I think I'm preaching to the choir here. You've heard all these arguments. I had the pleasure, I just have to say this, I had the pleasure of having lunch with the executive director of the San Diego Gun Owners PAC last week. He invited me to lunch. So I thought, why not? Now, I'd never met this guy, but we had been 2 ships passing in the day, because whenever there was a mass shooting, KPBS would call him in, and then they'd call me. So he'd go in and give his piece, and he'd walk out, and I'd come in and give my piece, and I'd walk out. So here we were having lunch together, and he was telling me how gun owners feel, in his words, villainized. I think he meant vilified, but villainized, because anytime anything happens, we just want to come and take their guns away, and we blame them for everything, and they're all gun nuts and whack jobs. And I said, I can sympathize with that. And I said, on the other end of the spectrum, there are those on our side who are afraid to say anything about gun control for fear that someone in the room might get angry and pull out a gun and shoot at us. We need to meet somewhere in the middle. All right, so since we're a policy group, I'm going to try to finish up by talking a little bit about what's going on as far as policy goes. Now, California has by far the strictest laws in the country. You live in the safest state in the country. But until Nevada and Arizona become safe states, we're still in peril. And this is the problem. California would not have to be by far the most gun control happy state in the country if all the other states had some modicum of regulation. If we all could agree on something as absolutely basic as no loophole gun background checks. But we can't even seem to do that. We can't seem to agree on technology that would make it harder for people to take guns from other people and do bad things, like smart trigger locks. Anything that gets tried to be passed, the NRA fights tooth and nail, and for whatever reason they have such outsized power in our government that they control the vote. But with each passing day, with each passing death, with each passing mass shooting, our voices get louder. They are on the wrong side of history. We've seen some amazing things happen in the last few decades. They're not done. Civil rights has occurred, but it's not perfect, as we know. Marriage equality has occurred, but we do not have an equal society for LGBT yet. Women's rights are better than they've ever been, but they're not equal. We have a long ways to go, but we've seen some momentous decisions that I'm sure nobody in the previous century could have ever imagined. And things happen faster now because of the internet, because of the society that we live in now. So there's a lot of hope, Trump notwithstanding. Okay, really quick. Governor Brown just signed 6 laws, 6 good, strong gun control laws into action. There's a guy in Carlsbad who wants to get those taken. I know I'm running out of time. Wants to get them off the ballot or get them, stop them from being enacted, and he's trying to get a referendum signed right now, 100,000 signatures. At the same time, Proposition 63, Gavin Newsom's Safety for All. Hear, hear. Expands on those laws, adds to those laws, background checks for ammunition purchases, felony for stealing a gun, you have to report when a gun is lost or stolen, no more bullet button guns, expanding the definition of assault rifles. All of these are really, really, really good. And I can tell by the applause I just heard that I don't need to ask you to vote for Proposition 63 in November. But the other thing we can do, okay, pardon me for saying this, and this is my closing remark. I noticed that by and large, no offense to the young people, we have an older audience in here, me included. So it's very, very important that we activate our younger folks and get them to have their moment sooner, the moment that pushes them over the edge. And God willing, it's not a moment of tragedy, it's just a moment of clarity. Okay? So that we can all get more involved. And I'm so thankful to the younger people that are here today. But it doesn't stop here. You are the guys that are not the average Democrat, but you can talk to your families and friends and make those phone calls and get people to not just vote for Hillary, but to vote for Prop 63 and to continue this fight for sensible gun regulation so we can regulate this dangerous, dangerous piece of equipment like we regulate other dangerous things. Thank you for letting me run over time. I hope I didn't steal too much of your time, Nathan, and I really appreciate you having me here tonight. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, Madam President. That is something I know we all look forward to saying in January. Thank you, Madam President. I had the great honor of being in Philadelphia last week, and it was unbelievable. It was truly a great historic occasion, and absolutely talking about a stark contrast. You have one candidate who we've never had a more qualified, better prepared person. And you have another one that is completely insane. I don't know that it would be any different. So, but thank you. I made some notes. I don't get to do this very often, so I might talk for a while. No, I'm kidding. I want to start by saying I didn't know there were so many Democrats in La Mesa.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I should have run for mayor out here. This is really impressive. But I appreciate the honor of you inviting me and having me here. Thank you, Linda and Jeff, for inviting me, and Ron for a great presentation. Before I start, I just want to say to all of us, we're going to fight for the causes we believe in, but in particular, you got to get on with your candidates. It is a tough road, I know. It's hard, it's difficult. I know Colin will do wonderful. I know you have other candidates, Scott, Susan, everyone who's here. It's really important that we get out. I don't miss running myself, but I do enjoy going out, so I told I come out to La Mesa, I'll walk a little bit for you. And you got to get out, you got to get known, you got to have people where they recognize you, and hopefully they vote for you. I had a funny experience, because you work so hard to get recognized, and then the election happens, and then it goes on. And somebody asked me, they said, do you miss doing it? And I said, not really. And I said, but every now and then I'm reminded why I don't, and that happened not too long ago at the gym. You spent years out there and you're trying to get better known to do it. And I was at the gym working out, it was about 5:30 in the morning, and I had a hat on, I was sweaty. And a guy looked at me, he had that familiar look. He kind of looked like he knew me, and I started feeling good. I thought, well, maybe this was someone who voted for me. And so he kind of waved, and I kind of waved back, and I was at the water fountain, and he walked over, and he said, he's looking, he said, anyone ever tell you you look like that Nathan Fletcher guy? And now I'm feeling really good, right? And I said, yeah, I said, I get that sometimes. And he said, it must really piss you off. And I'm like, no, I hear he's okay. I hear he's okay. But I love my job at UCSD. I love teaching students there. And mentoring them and helping connect them with jobs. One of my former students here, one of my best students, I have a whole group of students who we've gotten internships for, and they've gone on and got jobs. And so I want to say a special welcome to one of my best students at UCSD. Mr. Joe Armenta is here with me. He is back visiting. Joe went to DC. He worked for a friend of mine I served with in the legislature, Norma Torres, and he now works for Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, who I'm very fond of, and Joe does really good work. Joe took a class, the dean asked me at UCSD, he said, we want to do a campaigns class. And he said, we want to call it How to Win an Election. I'm like, you want me to teach that? So we actually changed the title. Joe made an A in How to Win or Lose an Election, because I can teach you how to do both. But I do want to share with you just briefly, and then I look forward to our discussion. My experience with guns is very profound. We see these discussions where people say that an AK-47 or an M4 or any of these weapons are sporting or recreational, and they're not. They're weapons of war. And I know because I fought in a war. I don't run because I've been in that situation where the rounds are flying and the bullets are flying. And they are weapons of war, and they have no place in our society. And those of us that join the military, we enlist to go into harm's way to make sure that our children and our families can live in an environment where they never have to face that, where they never have to encounter that situation, where they never have to hear those horrific sounds, where they never have to see the awful sight of people that have been shot, where they don't have to live in fear of that happening on a daily basis. And the reality is, in America today, we are not there. And so we fight. We fight to be that more perfect union. We fight to make a difference. We fight to make it safer. And, Ron mentioned in the time that we will be here tonight, 4 Americans will die to gun violence. In the few minutes I speak, at least one. And that's not a figure. That's someone's son or daughter. That's someone's husband or wife or grandchild. And imagine if it was yours. Imagine if you knew the name. And we rightfully stop the gravitational spin of the earth when Sandy Hook or Orlando happens, and we rightfully do it. But every day in America, 91 people are dying of gun violence. Every single day. whether it makes the news or it doesn't make the news. And there's no legislative act that can remove all evil from the world, but we can try. And we can make it better. And if there's one family who doesn't have to get that horrific call, that a life was cut short, then anything that we might do advocating and fighting and walking and campaigning is worth it. It's definitely worth it. And I know that as a veteran. Ron touched on some of the myths, and I think it's important because you have to go out and make the argument. You have to win the argument. You have to change people's minds. And I hear this talk all the time, well, Americans are just different. Americans are not different. Americans are not inherently any more violent than anyone else in the world. If you go and you read the studies, the rates of assault and burglary and domestic violence are universally consistent. The difference in America is the proliferation of weapons. We know that you are 4 times more likely to be killed by gun violence in America than you would be in Canada. We know you're 7 times more likely than you would be in Israel. We know you're 65 times more likely than you would be in Great Britain. And that is because of the availability of guns in the wrong hands, weapons of war, things that shouldn't be there. And those are things that we can do to make a difference. One of the other things you hear a lot of the times is people will say, well, 2/3 of the deaths from gun violence are from suicide. And that's roughly true. But we know we can make a difference here too. The states that have mandatory background checks for all gun sales have a 50% lower rate of suicide by guns than those that don't. A few years ago, Australia passed a broad sweeping section of common sense gun control legislation. And they saw a 70% decline in suicide by guns. 70% decline. Without any increase in suicide by other forms. Without any increase. Because we know if you go in and I work on the veteran suicide issue, I know about this. It's an impulsive act that people tend to do. And if they do it once and survive, they're unlikely to try again. But the simple reality is they don't survive when their first attempt is with a gun. So imagine if we could reduce 2/3 of the problem in America by 70%. Or even with mandatory background checks by 50%. These are things that we know we can do. We know we can have an impact. We know we can make a difference. I talked about the military. I have a foundation and we focus on post-traumatic stress and mental health issues for veterans. In America, every day we lose between 22 and 50 veterans who commit suicide. It is a staggering statistic. And as horrific as it is, the lives that we lost at war, and that should spur us to have a real conversation when those decisions are made about where we go and what we go and for how long. I can't imagine the heartbreak of a mom whose son or daughter survived combat and couldn't survive the peace that follows. Israel put in place some common sense restrictions on soldiers taking guns home with them. And they saw a 40% decline in suicide. But what happened here in America, a friend of mine, General Pete Corelli, Vice Chair of the U.S. Army, 4-star general, tried to tackle this issue. And he simply said, we're going to talk to soldiers about guns. We're going to talk to them about the dangers that they pose. We're going to figure out who has them. We're going to look for risky behavior, and we're going to counsel them, including those who have privately owned weapons on military bases. We're not confiscating, we're not taking away, we're just going to talk to them. We're going to tell them the dangers. And you know what happened? The NRA said no. They said a general cannot talk to a sergeant about guns that they privately hold on a government facility. And then the NRA went to Senator Jim Inhofe and had legislation added that prohibits military commanders from speaking to soldiers, from speaking to them about guns that they may own on a military base. We know that we can make a difference in this regard by informing them, by talking to them, by counseling them. But at the end of the day, the NRA won. Now, that can demoralize you, or it can motivate you. And for me, it motivates me. It motivates me to go out there and tell that story and advocate. Because I'm telling you, the vast majority of Americans, when informed of the facts and the reality, will make the right decision. Even the vast majority of NRA members support background checks. Vast majority of Republicans. But their elected officials don't respond. And they don't respond because the issue is not important enough for them to influence their votes. And we have to make it important enough by going out and changing minds and changing hearts and informing people of why it matters. In addition to veterans, I think a lot about kids. I have two, 5 and 8. The absolute joys of my life, the most precious things I've ever had. And when you watch the interviews of parents who have lost their children, scarring their entire life, something so innocent and so precious as a child, to go to school. Since 2013, we've had 161 school shootings in America. 161. Now, we could do things that we know work. But instead, what do states do? They say, well, we're going to have mandatory active shooter drills. I was talking to my mom the other day, and I was saying, Mom, look, she lives in Arkansas, and they've lost their mind a little bit. You know, they used to like good people, and now they're a little off their rocker. And I said, Mom, you got to go out there, and you got to talk to these folks, and you have to tell them that Donald Trump, if president, can launch nuclear weapons. He can actually do it. You can't stop him. If he's president, he can just do it. It came out today that he had a meeting with a foreign policy advisor, and he asked 3 times in the meeting, I don't understand, if we have these weapons, why can't we just use them? I mean, he actually said this. And my mom said, Nathan, she said, when I was a kid, and some of you may remember this, she said at school we would do the duck and cover drills. As if climbing under a desk is going to protect you from a nuclear weapon. But she said, and this is interesting, she said it terrorized me. I worried. I was a child, and I worried about a nuclear weapon. And kids should worry about Little League, about who they're going to play with tomorrow. They shouldn't worry about active shooter drills. The state of Missouri put in place a law that requires every school to do active shooter training, which means including fake blood. I mean, it's unbelievable. And that same state in Missouri, the same year they required active shooter training, they ended the mandatory background checks that they'd had. And the year after, they saw a 25% increase in their homicide rate. And that's why we have to go out and we have to talk about these things and we have to promote the solutions. I want to talk on one of them, simple thing of mandatory background checks. In America right now, California is a little different, but broadly speaking in America, you go to buy a gun, they run you through what's called NICS, National Instant Criminal Check System. Should get a response within about 90 seconds. Now there's a couple problems with that. The first problem is, if it flags something, you only have 3 days to investigate it to figure out why it was flagged, or the sale automatically goes through. And you see thousands and thousands of folks who were flagged, but because our systems are not automated, because again the NRA inserted things that doesn't allow these records to be computerized, then the gun is sold. The second problem is that's only for a licensed dealer. But in a lot of states, you can walk into a gun shop and buy 25 guns, put them in your trunk, and sell them in the parking lot of the gun store. With no ID, no background check, no documentation. If you go to a gun shop, you can walk in, you can buy a gun in most states. No ID, no background check, no record of the transaction. Now I heard a great analogy, and they said, imagine you go to the airport, and you have 2 lines to get on the plane, and 1 line puts you through TSA. You got to take everything out of your pockets, you got to take your shoes off, you got to go through the metal detector, the little machine that screens you. Now imagine there's another line, where we don't do anything, you just walk straight through. You carry your bag straight through, nobody checks you, they don't look at your ID, they don't see who you are, they don't examine anything. Would you get on a plane if 40% of the people had just walked through the line with no security? But that's what happens in America. For up to 40% of the purchases, there's no background check, there's no screening, there's no documentation. And that is something that we can change. You mentioned the mental health. It's not, statistically, it's not the mentally ill who do it. One of the largest drivers of it, it's men. It's primarily men, let's be honest, it's men. And one of the biggest things is domestic violence. And yet, we don't have a uniform standard that says if you've been convicted of domestic violence as a misdemeanor, that you can't buy a gun. These are things that we can do that make sense. The most absurd of all is that the U.S. government determines you're such a threat to our country that you can't fly on a plane. You are on the terror watch list because you can't fly on a plane, but yet you can buy a gun. And over 2,000 people on the terror watch list have bought guns. And these are the things that Congress continues to fight. And that's why we fight back. Because in 1871, the NRA started. It was a Union general out of the Civil War, and it was started to promote gun safety and marksmanship. It was existed for hunters and sportsmen, sportswomen, sports people. And for over 100 years, that's all they did. They didn't lobby, they didn't do politics, they didn't do legislation. And then in 1968, we had the horrific assassinations. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and others, and that led to one of the first most sweeping gun control measures signed by President Lyndon Johnson. And that act changed the NRA. A few years later, at a leadership meeting, they had a huge internal battle, and the old regime that had been promoting gun safety for over 100 years was forced out. And Wayne LaPierre was ushered in. Then they formed an alliance with the gun industry, who makes billions of dollars on gun sales. And they came up with this rigid adherence to any common sense thing you do is trying to take away someone's fundamental right. And I can say that if only the Republicans cared as much about your fundamental right to vote, which they have no problem impeding or interrupting or taking away, if they do the right thing with guns, we would be in a better place. I mean, think about this. There is no evidence out there that says that people commit fraud when they go vote. None? None. None. I teach a whole class on the Voting Rights Act. There is none. But yet countless states put in place requirements to make it harder, to make you show ID, to make you go get a new form of ID. And those same people that think you're such a danger to go vote with no evidence will ignore all of the evidence to say that you shouldn't show any form of identification when you buy a weapon of war. And that makes no sense. And that's why we fight. I was with Gavin Newsom last week and the week before, and we talked about Proposition 63, and we're going to be doing a lot to promote that. Because in California, we can lead the way. And as we lead the way, it's true, as California goes, so goes the nation. And we have to go out and we have to do that. And you don't always win the first time, and you don't always win the second time. When I was in the legislature, we picked a fight with tobacco. And they beat us. And I brought the bill back. And they beat us again, but I got closer, and I brought the bill back. And eventually we got it through. Because at the end of the day, you can win, but you win. This is not a fight that we're going to win. Look, we don't have any moneyed interest with billions of dollars on our side. And so we're not going to win it by going out and convincing someone to give us billions of dollars. We're going to win it by changing people's hearts, by going to talk to them and say, what if it was your child? What if it was your son or your daughter or your parents? And what if you knew that you could do something to save them and protect them? I see it in the work we do at OFA. OFA was based on the basic principle. The president talked about it. He's a community organizer. You go out and you organize in the communities. You get people to sign petitions. You get them to walk. You get them to care. You get them to engage. You get them to talk to their neighbors. And I'm telling you, that will carry the day every single time. And at the end of the day, that message that we can do better, that pursuit of a more perfect union, is something we'll all do. Ron mentioned that moment you have where you decide that you're going to do something. And for me, I think it stems from my military service. And I'll close with this. When I was a child growing up, my closest friends were my cousins. My closest friend was my oldest cousin, Jeremy. We were the same age. Jeremy Wise was the name, Jeremy Wise. And he had two younger brothers, Ben Wise and Bo Wise. So we always called them the three wise men. So there was three of them, and their name was Wise. So we always called them the three wise men. And we grew up in Arkansas, and we played, we camped, we did all these things. We all joined the military together. It was a very service-oriented family. And we joined the military. My brother still flies F-18s in the Navy today. I joined the Marines. Jeremy joined the Navy, became a Navy SEAL. Ben joined the Army, was an Army Green Beret. And Baby Bo, he brought it home strong in the Marines. And when you have two Marines, a Navy SEAL, and a Green Beret, the odds are not in their favor. We estimate we did over 3,000 days deployed to the war. Tragically, December 30th, 2009, Jeremy was killed by a suicide bomber in Afghanistan. And I spent forever with Ben. And I said, hey, you got to step up now. You know, you got to help your family, you got to be strong. And he looked at me. Jeremy and I were the oldest, kind of the oldest, and he did great for 2 years and 14 days. And then he was killed in Afghanistan. And Bo is still here with us. And so every day I get up and I fight for veterans because I can't fathom one of those Bo Wises who survived combat. They can't survive the peace. But in a broader sense, we fight every day to honor, I fight every day to honor Jeremy and Ben who didn't have a chance to live their life. And because they didn't have a chance to live the rest of theirs, I can't waste mine. Right? I have an obligation every day to go out and fight for the things that we believe in. To fight that people have more opportunity, that there's more equality, that there's more safety. Because although we will never get to a place where there is no evil or no bad, that's why we strive for that more perfect union. Right? And every day we go out and we do our part to make that world a little bit better place. And just to close, we know we can do it. We had a problem with team smoking. We tackled team smoking. We dropped it dramatically. Ron mentioned automobiles, an 80% reduction in fatalities, an 80% reduction in fatalities from automobiles. And it wasn't one simple thing. It was seatbelts, it was speed limits, it was airbags, it was a lot of things put together. And so now we have to go out and fight. We're going to fight in California for Prop 63. We're going to fight nationally to end the terror watch list can purchase guns. We're going to fight for mandatory background checks. We're going to fight to end high-capacity magazines, to get assault weapons off our streets. And eventually, with enough determination and perseverance, we will move public opinion. We will change people's hearts. And we will do the best we can for our children and grandchildren to make that. Thank you very much.